The Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg Tribunal, excuse me, the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal.
Yes, those exist, but international laws, the jus gentium goes back to antiquity. However, unfortunately, a lot of our liberal friends think history began a few decades ago.
The League of Nations was useless. It fell apart, and that's why we had the UN. That's why we had the Geneva Convention.
Right, I'm talking about millennia ago,
because we looked
not
at
merely
piles of millions
but it's true.
of
Woodrow
dead
Wilson
bodies,
failed
and
with
we
the
said
League of
that's
Nations.
a bad idea. We looked at piles of millions of dead bodies and said that's a bad idea. Let's not do that anymore. Let's actually have a framework and rules and laws. And Trump is blowing that up. By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela.
In today's video, Kyle Kulinski shuts down Michael Knowles on Piers Morgan Uncensored as a heated debate spirals over US foreign policy, interventionism, and accountability at home and abroad. Kyle Kulinski cuts through the talking points with sharp fact checks, challenging Michael Knowles on regime change narratives, constitutional war powers, and the real consequences of America First policies. As tensions rise, the conversation exposes the gaps between ideology and reality, especially when theory collides with real-world harm. So let's dive in and watch how Kyle Kulinski shuts down Michael Knowles on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
If you sign on to stuff like this, you're saying might makes right and the law of the jungle is back. What you're saying is China has a right to go into whatever smaller country they want and depose the leader and say we're doing it because we can and we have the right to do it and we have bigger guns and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So they're never going to address that fundamental question, which is why do we have a right? Do we actually believe in international law, or was that all a joke? Are we rolling the clock back to the 1700s and the 1800s, and we're going super primitive style here? And I think the answer to that is yes, they want to go super primitive style.
International law goes back to antiquity. It's not some creation of modernity, whether we're talking about the 1700s or the 20th century.
The Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg Tribunal, excuse me, the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal.
Yes, those exist, but international laws, the jus gentium goes back to antiquity. However, unfortunately, a lot of our liberal friends think history began a few decades ago.
The League of Nations was useless. It fell apart, and that's why we had the UN. That's why we had the Geneva Convention.
Right, I'm talking about millennia ago,
because we looked at piles of millions of dead bodies, and we said that's a bad idea. We looked at piles of millions of dead bodies and said that's a bad idea. Let's not do that anymore. Let's actually have a framework and rules and laws. And Trump is blowing that up. By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela. He bombed Yemen and Somalia and Nigeria and Iran. He's threatening Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Mexico. And you sit there the whole time and act like it's okay. Is there anything Trump could do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train, or are you going to tickle his taint for the rest of your fucking life?
No, there have been plenty of Trump policies that I've criticized because he's only right about 99.78% of the time. So the First Step Act I thought was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the administration has been very successful. What's your problem? What's your
problem is
criticism?
that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you say
you
that?
know that what he's doing in imperialism and you don't care.
I just answered your question, and I corrected
Congratulations. You rented your brain to a war criminal, pedophile, rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal, pedophile, rapist? You brought up a point. You brought up international law, and you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. Excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity. It's a principle of the jus gentium. And then you said, well, international law has failed because of the League of Nations failure, which I think is actually undermining your argument and proving my point and proving Trump's point, because the liberal internationalism that was established by people like Woodrow Wilson did, in fact, fail, which is why we need to restore an older and more classical conception of the international order, which is precisely what Trump's doing. So I think you've hoisted yourself with your own petard. And then you just make a lot of vulgar sort of non sequiturs because you don't have a leg to stand on.
All right, let me bring in...
Let me ask you this question. Hold on, Piers. Let me ask him a question real quick. Tell me the name of the Minister of Defense in Venezuela.
I don't know. Whatever his name is.
Well, and that's the problem, is that you're
Rodriguez
advocating for a regime change. You don't know the first thing.
I didn't. I just said the opposite. I argued against the regime change.
He actually said the opposite. I heard Michael Knowles.
I just want to correct something.
I heard Michael Knowles say the regime remains there, right? So he said the opposite, in fact. I want to bring in Coleman.
No, but he wanted to take out Maduro. Don't give me that cutesy little BS.
Yes, but he made the point.
This gets heated fast, but the substance matters more than the insults. International law didn't just pop out of modern liberalism. After World War II, frameworks like the UN Charter were built specifically to prevent unilateral wars after tens of millions died. Since 1945, interstate wars between major powers have sharply declined, according to political science datasets, showing rules actually constrain violence. Tossing those norms aside doesn't restore order, it increases miscalculation, civilian deaths, and endless conflict. History keeps repeating that lesson. On regime change, the track record is brutal. US-backed interventions in Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan destabilized regions, displaced millions, and often strengthened extremist groups, according to Pentagon and UN assessments. Even when leaders are removed, institutions collapse without legitimacy. Venezuela already suffers from sanctions-driven shortages documented by humanitarian groups, not liberation. Advocating force without basic knowledge of a country's political structure proves Kyle's point. Arrogance replaces evidence and civilians pay the price. History shows this pattern again and again with devastating human costs. What really undercuts the right-wing defense here is accountability. The US Constitution gives Congress war powers, yet presidents of both parties bypass it routinely, eroding democratic consent. Polls consistently show Americans oppose endless foreign wars, yet defense spending keeps rising past $800 billion. Kyle's side isn't naive idealism, it's realism grounded in data. When law, democracy, and restraint disappear, power fills the vacuum, and ordinary people suffer first. History proves unchecked force always comes home eventually through instability, debt, trauma, and blowback for everyone.
Because I think Xi would have looked at Ukraine and thought, well, what's America actually done to stop Putin taking as much as he can?
Do you think that international law is going to limit Chairman Xi?
Well, no, I don't actually. I do think the concept of international law has been twisted and torn apart so badly that I'm actually uncertain what it really means anymore. Because people don't seem to... I mean, if you look at what Israel's done in Gaza, I would say they've trampled over international law with utter impunity, and they don't care.
Reasonable minds can differ, but I agree that's a good point on the
no, they can't.
Murkiness of international law.
Yeah, okay, Kyle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I find this whole conversation preposterous because the idea that we're the moral arbiter of anything is honestly laughable. Trump is himself a criminal. He was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He's covering for a billionaire pedophile cabal as we speak. We armed and funded a genocide in Gaza. We also armed and funded a genocide committed by Saudi Arabia in Yemen. If there's any country on earth where there's some semblance of a sound argument to do regime change, it's our regime being changed. So I don't want to open the door to this might makes right, law of the jungle nonsense. And everybody else except Dave, seemingly on the panel, is in favor of that. And
America has a mechanism. Kyle, hang on. America has a mechanism for regime change. It's called the election every 4 years. And the truth is, Americans had a good, long, hard look at...
You're making my point.
Well, no, I'm not.
This is my point.
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm saying you live in a free democratic society with free democratic elections. That's why Trump won in 2016. That's why he lost in 2020, whatever he wants people to think. And that's why he won again in 2024. That is regime change, how it should happen.
We back 73% of the world's dictatorships. The idea that we say, here's a dictator we don't like, we're going to overthrow them, is ridiculous. By any objective standard, Netanyahu is worse than Maduro, and we're not overthrowing him. So the whole conversation is absurd. We're in no position to be the world police or the moral arbiters. In fact, Trump himself literally says, this is about the oil. It's about the natural resources. It's about stealing that from the corporations and the billionaires. So the whole conversation about
I think it could be. I actually think I think Venezuela can be about a number of things at the same time. That's why I think nuance is an important factor in these things. It can be
but
part.
That's the
hang on, Kyle.
Can it just be pointed out?
It can be about oil. It can be about oil. It can be about Maduro being a gangster. It can be about
Piers,
a number of things.
This was sold to us.
Trump's a gangster.
The problem with Piers' framing is that it treats US power as inherently stabilizing, when history shows the opposite. Since World War II, the US has intervened militarily in dozens of countries, and studies from Brown University's Costs of War project show these actions have killed millions and displaced tens of millions more. That doesn't deter rivals like China or Russia. It signals that brute force overrides rules. When norms collapse, every major power feels justified doing the same thing. There's also the hypocrisy angle Kyle's side keeps circling, and the data backs it up. The US supports or cooperates with well over half of the world's authoritarian governments, according to Freedom House. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Israel receive massive US aid despite documented human rights abuses. That makes democracy promotion ring hollow. If international law only matters when it's convenient, it stops being law and becomes branding, which is exactly why global trust in US leadership keeps dropping. And strategically, regime change just doesn't work. Intelligence reviews on Iraq and Libya show power vacuums empower militias, criminal networks, and foreign adversaries, not democracy. Venezuela's crisis has been worsened by sanctions that economists link to shortages and civilian suffering, not leadership reform. Kyle's position aligns with realism. Restraint, diplomacy, and consistency reduce conflict. The alternative is a world where might makes right, and history shows that road always leads to chaos, blowback, and declining legitimacy at home and abroad.
But Kyle, I talked about both sides taking sort of implacable, incendiary positions. You compared ICE agents to Nazis, described the officer as an ICE thug who murdered a woman on camera by shooting her in the face. I mean, you're determining there that what we have watched with our own eyes, because we got the benefit of seeing all the videos, is somebody making a deliberate calculation to murder that woman for no reason.
I think he did. And
Why would you do that?
Study the video closely. Well, I'll explain it to you. So first of all, these guys are all roided up freaks. Let's point that out, that these are like Proud Boys and white nationalists and, the dregs of society who have now been given a gun and a badge.
Well, that's a ridiculous generalization. And again, I don't think that helps.
Let me finish
but that kind of generalization doesn't help your argument. It makes you sound equally deranged.
No. I don't care about convincing you guys with your cult of fake nuance. I care about speaking to the American people who saw with their eyes.
God forbid we should have nuance.
Yeah, because it's fake nuance. That's the problem. You have J.D. Vance out there saying that this guy, it should have absolute immunity. Absolute immunity? So if you rape somebody, he should be able to get off? This is fucking ridiculous. Absolute immunity.
I don't agree. Nor do I think, Kyle, that Renee Good was deliberately trying to run over this ICE officer. I just don't think that there's
and the guy was trying to kill her.
That she was trying to do that or to cause him bodily harm. I think it was quite clear from the wheel positioning that she was trying to drive away. And the guy was ignoring his training to stand in front of her, and he had a past incident which probably, in the moment, made him fear the same thing was going to happen.
Piers, we have to have one factual correction. Just one little bit to inject some facts.
I literally never even made the fucking point I was trying to make at the beginning.
Don't talk at the same time.
The wheels were aimed at the cop when she accelerated.
All right, Kyle, I'll come back to you. Kyle, I will come back to you. Let Michael just interject on this one point. Michael.
This is really important because I feel sorry for the woman. It's very sad that she died. I'm not in any way happy that she died. She was in that position, one, because her lesbian partner said, "Drive, baby, drive, drive." The lesbian partner then said, "It's my fault. I told
Why
her
is
to
it
be
relevant
out
that she's a lesbian?
Hold on 1 second.
Why is that relevant?
Because she's the partner.
You interrupt. Why is it relevant that she's a lesbian?
1 second, Kyle. I'm just trying to have a conversation.
I would say it's irrelevant that she's a lesbian. Secondly, drive can be an entreaty to drive away, which is what I think she was doing. Thirdly, the demeanor of Renee Good in the final video that came out shows somebody pretty calm, certainly not confrontational, certainly doesn't look to me like somebody intent on mowing down an ICE officer. I think she just wanted to get out of there.
The clash exposes a bigger issue than tone policing. Federal data and DOJ reports show use of force incidents disproportionately escalate during immigration enforcement, especially traffic-style stops. ICE's own training materials warn agents not to position themselves in front of moving vehicles precisely because it creates unnecessary lethal risk. When that guidance is ignored, responsibility doesn't magically shift to civilians. Bodycam studies also show officers often misinterpret flight as threat, even when suspects are trying to disengage peacefully during tense encounters nationwide. Claims of absolute immunity make this even worse. Courts have repeatedly ruled that qualified immunity isn't a blank check, yet prosecutors rarely charge officers even when civilians are unarmed. Research from the National Bureau of Economic Research found no evidence that stronger accountability leads to higher crime. Meanwhile, civilians killed in disputed encounters are overwhelmingly not convicted of crimes beforehand. Accountability isn't anti-law enforcement, it's basic rule of law consistency. Public trust collapses when systems shield power instead of facts and evidence in democratic societies. What gets lost in Michael's defense is pattern recognition. Videos show Renee Good calm, non-aggressive, and attempting to leave, aligning with studies on stress responses that favor escape over confrontation. Labeling grief-stricken partners or personal details as relevant distracts from conduct analysis. Kyle's side resonates because people see a system quick to excuse lethal force and slow to question authority. That imbalance erodes legitimacy faster than any harsh rhetoric ever could. History shows unchecked force fuels backlash, lawsuits, protests, and long-term institutional decay nationally. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.